this mount of the congregation, the Hebrew phrase translated mount of the congregation or mount of the assembly is Har Moed. Har Moed. Why is this relevant? Because in the ancient world, everybody knew mountains were where the gods met, like Olympus in the Greek myths. Well, in the Canaanite stories, this would have been Mount Hermon. That's essentially the Canaanite Olympus. Well, God has his own Har Moed, and that's Zion. And so what Torrey was saying and pointed out etymologically is that when John had to transliterate that phrase, Har Moed, Mount of Assembly, from Hebrew into Greek, he had a problem because in the middle of that word Moed is a glottal stop. In other words, there's no corresponding character or sound in Greek. So he had to choose one that came close. So he chose the letter Gamma. And when English translators looked at the Greek text of Revelation, they said, oh, Gamma, that must be the letter G. But it's not. It's not Magidon, it's Moed, Har Moed. So the battle for the end of the age, the battle at the end of the age, Armageddon, is fought at Jerusalem. This long war is all about who controls Mount Zion, God's Mount of Assembly.
Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you!
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want!
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
Torches high.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Hey guys, what is happening and what is up? Hold out that glass, because you know what time it is. We about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens Podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I am your host, Doc Brown, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus Lens to take a second look at everything. Hey guys, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the hero's journey. Be sure and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Be sure to check out this banner right here below with all of our social medias at their various platforms. Check those out, man. I much appreciate that. But hey, with all the crap out of the way, let's get to the fun stuff, guys. That's what we're here for. We're here for these enlightening conversations with these big brain guys. And I'm back with this guest, and he was one of the guys that quote unquote red pilled me. One of the first books that I actually read of his, and I got it here to show off to you guys. Last Clash of the Titans by Derek Gilbert. This right here answered so many questions and connected so many dots for me with all the mythology and the Greeks and tying it in with Genesis 6. This was really a mind-blowing read, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. But welcome back to the show, Derek, man. Thank you for coming back, Dan.
Doc, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me on.
No, I definitely appreciate you taking your time out. You're a busy guy. You always got 2 or 3 coals in the fire and one in each hand ready to go in next. I know you're a real busy guy. I appreciate your time.
Well, it's been kind of a crazy week in a lot of ways, both nationally in terms of news, internationally with things going on overseas, and personally, my mother suffered a fall this week, and so we spent a couple of days at hospital just taking care of it. She's recovering well and back at the nursing home, so that's good news. But that and under a deadline to get the next book done. So I've got about 5 weeks after tonight's conversation to get that finished up and turned in.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, he's always got one in the fire, guys, one in the fire and one on the ready to go. But Derek, just for anybody that's maybe living under a rock or new to this space, hasn't got familiar with you and your work, just kind of give an introduction for those people that don't know who you are and what you do, brother.
Well, Sharon and I have been we've been podcasting for quite a while. In fact, it was about 6 months ago, somebody referred to us as the OGs of podcasting. And I, so old, I had to look that up because I didn't know what it meant. I thought it meant old geezers. But we started podcasting in 2005, back when Apple was still begging people to submit podcasts to the iTunes store. That was back when they still had iPods, and that's why they're called podcasts. I remember why they named them podcasts in the first place. But we started doing that in 2005, and we've been we thought at the time it was to market a series of novels that we were writing, and it turned out that it was to get us to start interviewing people ourselves. And so, because after the first podcast, it was okay, buy our books. What do we do next week? Okay, well, so we had to come up with things to talk about, which was the research we were putting into the books, which then led us to talk to people, and many of whom who've been called home by the Lord, like, Tom Horn, Mike Heiser, Russ Dizdar, Rob Skiba, Chris Putnam. And that led to us finally getting the opportunity to attend some prophecy conferences and record interviews there, then present at prophecy conferences, then come join Tom Horn in his new venture called Skywatch TV back in 2015. So I gave up a career in steel sales, and we moved to the Ozarks, and have been here for the last 10 years. Love it. Would not move back to a city. I was telling you, beforehand, I'm from Chicago, and you couldn't pay me enough to go back to a city at this point. In fact, even driving up to Springfield, Missouri, which is nowhere near the size of Chicago, is now a white knuckle ride anymore. And basically the last 10 years, we've been full-time doing this, podcasting, but also part of the Skywatch broadcast team. I do a daily news analysis for Skywatch TV called 5 in 10. Sharon and I have produced several programs now. Sci Friday, based on her experience as a molecular biologist. We've done 300 episodes of Unraveling Revelation. We're back producing a program called The Bible's Greatest Mysteries, and we've been writing. So between the two of us now, let's see, there's 3. I'm looking at the covers on the wall here, 3, and we're missing a couple. So it's about 10 or 11 books in the last 10 years. Most recently, our book, The Gates of Hell, which is about the geography, really, of Jesus' ministry, but also how those gates can be wherever we are if we open ourselves up to the spirit realm. And a lot of it has to do with the reality of these fallen angels that were worshipped as gods by the Greeks, the Romans, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, and so on. Sharon's doing some research now into the Norse pantheon, so she can bring the Norse gods into her Red Wing Saga series of supernatural thrillers. And so, it's we're kind of nerds. We're sort of like the intelligence analysts in the back room, feeding information to guys out there on the front lines who are doing the real preaching and spiritual warfare, deliverance ministries, and things like that. And that's seems to be our calling, because I can't imagine us doing anything other than what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And Derek, it's okay to be nerd, because you are amongst good company. Me and my listeners, we're very nerdy. We're scripture nerds. We love this stuff. So you are definitely in good company, man.
Amen.
And actually, I had Aunt Sharon, as I like to call her, on the show a few months back, talking about your guys' release of the Gates of Hell. We kind of touched on the Davos train that cut through that mountain, and all that pagan symbolism and ritual and stuff that you covered in your book. I think it was chapter 33, because I thought that was significant. It's kind of stood out there. But yeah, you mentioned that you got a new book in the works, and you're 5 weeks out from a deadline. What are you going to be tackling this go around?
Well, the title is War of the Watchers. And this is something that I've felt pretty strongly about since we went to Israel last spring. We've been there 4 times now, and last year was kind of a small group because we were just 6 months into the war in Gaza, and we only had about 9 of us all together. Normally, our tours range between 80 and 120 people. Our tour next month, we're only going to have about 25. I think people are still just really nervous about traveling to Israel at this point, and understandably so. But it occurred to me while we were over there, and then in seeing how Christians in particular have responded to Israel since this war began almost 2 years ago now. We're coming up on the 2-year mark, 710 days now of this war. The longer it drags on, the more world opinion turns against Israel. And it's because this is a supernatural war. This is a spiritual conflict. And it really is all about control of the Holy Land. I mean, we can set aside for the moment what people think about Israel, the Jews, Benjamin Netanyahu, whatever. The point is that the fallen realm wants control of the ground that God declared would be his forever. Psalm 132, verses 13 and 14, God says, Zion is where I will dwell forever, for I have desired it. I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it open in front of me, but essentially that's it. There are other places in the scriptures too where God declares that Zion, which is Israel as a whole, but Jerusalem in particular, is his dwelling place. The final battle of the age, Armageddon, is a term that's been misused. This is not Bruce Willis trying to save the world from an incoming asteroid or comet or whatever. Armageddon is the final battle of the age between Jesus and his heavenly army and the forces of darkness. We've been taught for generations by men that Bible teachers that we respect, including Tom Horn, Chuck Missler, and others, that this will be fought at Megiddo because Har in Hebrew means mountain. And then you get the last part of that, Megiddo or Megiddon, Har Megiddon, Mount of Megiddo. Okay, it makes sense. Armageddon, probably at Megiddo. Except there is no mountain at Megiddo. Mm-hmm. It is in the Jezreel Valley. That's the opposite of a mountain. There is a tell. That's the mound that's created by layers of a city that's been, destroyed and rebuilt on top of the rubble, time after time after time. But there is no mountain at Megiddo. And it also is inconsistent with other apocalyptic prophecies in the Old Testament, like Joel 2 and 3, Zechariah 12, Zechariah 14. I mean, Zechariah 14 is pretty clear. Messiah lands on the Mount of Olives. That's 50 miles away from Megiddo. Yeah, it splits it in two. But in Zechariah 12, it's clear that this battle is fought at Jerusalem. Well, 90 years ago, Mike Heiser pointed this out in one of his teachings years back. A scholar by the name of Charles Torrey wrote a paper for the Harvard Theological Review. So, I mean, this is, not some fringe guy, writing somewhere to try to create a, sensational new way of reading the Bible.
It's not me or you
exactly,
being all heretics on the airwaves.
That's right. He pointed out that there's a phrase that's used in Isaiah chapter 14, which is the, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, the divine rebel from Eden. And divine, by the way, does not mean holy. Divine just means supernatural. He's kicked out of Eden, and it's because he wants to establish his mount of assembly or mount of the congregation in the far reaches of the north, the heights of the north, the sides of the north. And that's a reference to a mountain called Tsaphon, Yarkate Tsaphon. That points to a mountain in the ancient world everybody knew was the location of Baal's palace. Okay. So anyway, this is
one of your books too. I think it was Great Inception, how Moses pointed the people to, God told Moses to point to that mountain and be like, hey, storm god, watch this. That blew my mind. I learned that from you.
Yeah. There was a place on the shore of the Red Sea. This is really what opened our eyes to this. Exodus 14, they're running away from Pharaoh and God tells them to turn around and camp opposite Baal Zephon. Like, what's Baal doing in Egypt? And what is a Zephon anyway? Anyway, it's a reference to this mountain, which is in southern Turkey today. It's near the ancient city of Antioch. It was known to be sacred to the storm god, not just of the Canaanites, not just Baal, but also of the Hurrians and the Hittites. In fact, Zeus was supposed to have defeated the chaos monster Typhon at that mountain. And scholars think the name of the chaos monster Typhon came from the mountain Tsaphon. Anyway, this mount of the congregation, the Hebrew phrase translated mount of the congregation or mount of the assembly is Har Moed. Har Moed. Why is this relevant? Because in the ancient world, everybody knew mountains were where the gods met, like Olympus in the Greek myths. Well, in the Canaanite stories, this would have been Mount Hermon. That's essentially the Canaanite Olympus. Well, God has his own Har Moed, and that's Zion. And so what Torrey was saying and pointed out etymologically is that when John had to transliterate that phrase, Har Moed, Mount of Assembly, from Hebrew into Greek, he had a problem because in the middle of that word Moed is a glottal stop. In other words, there's no corresponding character or sound in Greek. So he had to choose one that came close. So he chose the letter Gamma. And when English translators looked at the Greek text of Revelation, they said, oh, Gamma, that must be the letter G. But it's not. It's not Magidon, it's Moed, Har Moed. So the battle for the end of the age, the battle at the end of the age, Armageddon, is fought at Jerusalem. This long war is all about who controls Mount Zion, God's Mount of Assembly. Well, we wrote in our book Veneration that, and I think we reached the same conclusion as Carl Gallup's, that Eden is at Jerusalem. Carl came at it from a different direction. We looked at some research by a scholar by the name of Nicholas Wyatt, who argued that when Moses wrote the description of the location of Eden, he named four rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, everybody knows what those are, the Gihon, which is the only freshwater source at Jerusalem, the Gihon Spring. That's where Hezekiah built that pool inside the walls to make sure that they would never be deprived of water during a siege. And the other one is the Pishon. And people have wondered for years, what is the Pishon? Wyatt looked at the surrounding languages and found that in Egyptian, that word Pishon actually means the encompassing one, which was a term used to refer to the Nile.
If you're someone who still thinks the wild has secrets, who feels stories woven into the wind, this brand's going to hit home. The Soul Squatch makes Squatch-approved gear. I don't mean that lightly. This stuff is functional, yes, but it's laced with legend. It's for people who believe in what's out there and what it brings out of them. They're hats, beanies, stickers. They're designed by folks who live and breathe the myth. No gimmicks, just real outdoor gear with soul. Go to thesoulsquatch.com and find something made for fellow believers, wanderers, or anyone who still listens when the woods go quiet.
So what Moses was describing there when he was placing this, Eden, was naming the three best-known sources of fresh water to people in the ancient Near East: the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and then the only freshwater source at Jerusalem. So what he was doing is describing sort of a cosmic geography, not a physical geography. So if we're looking in Iraq, if we're looking in Iran, if we're looking, there are some who say maybe it was in what is now the Persian Gulf before the waters rose at the end of the Younger Dryas period, 10,000 BC. Wyatt said, no, it's cosmic geography. Eden is no longer perceptible to us here in the natural realm. So this is what he was describing. Like, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then if you believe that you've got these rebels who have been kicked out of Eden at the beginning of this long war, and this long war ends at Jerusalem, suddenly things make a whole lot of sense. Why has Israel, for its size, it's smaller than the state of New Jersey, and the Temple Mount is like 35 acres. I've got friends here in the Ozarks who've got more property than that. We've got 10 here on our property, and ours is not a particularly big piece of ground. Why is there so much bloodshed, anger, political intrigue revolve around Israel through the ages? It's because it's where God has decreed, it's where God decreed he would dwell forever. And the fallen realm wants to make him a liar, show that he either can't, won't, or doesn't care to fulfill his promises, which then of course means that they can discredit his entire, all of his word, the entire Bible. So I think there are a lot of things at play there. They want to discredit his word by pushing the Jews into the sea, because, I disagree with those who say that the Israel that was declared in 1948 is not the real Israel. And we can discuss that if you like.
Zionists.
The Zionist movement that began at the end of the 19th century. And that's going to be in the book, and how Israel came to be in 1948. But the bottom line is, however Israel came to be, you know that the fallen realm, if the forces of Islam were to somehow push Israel out of the land, you know there would be skeptics who say, see, we told you that God can't fulfill, won't fulfill, doesn't care to fulfill his promises. It's all part of a supernatural war that's not going to conclude until Christ returns at the head of a heavenly army.
Mm-hmm. And I love looking at scripture too, because I mean, you know as well as I do, Derek, it's like an onion. You got to peel back the layers, and there is just narratives within narratives, the stories within the stories, the macro and the micro. And one thing that I kind of looked at for a while was the whole Jacob and Esau. And that's what you see every time you turn on the news. It's the two, like people, DNA wise, brothers, if you want to just, put it in that kind of language, family tree, rivalry. They're fighting. They're both laying claim to this certain piece of land, this inheritance. One feels like they were screwed out of their inheritance. And I mean, you see it all over the news today.
Yeah, and the irony here, and I had a bit of an exchange on social media with a fellow a couple of weeks ago, is that you get those who claim that rabbinic Judaism is part of the serpent seed that was the serpent seed doctrine. The bottom line is he claimed that rabbinic Judaism is essentially Edomite. And of course, Esau was the founder of the land of Edom. But the rabbis look at the Roman Catholic Church and Gentiles as a whole, but the Roman Catholic Church in particular, and say, no, they're the Edomites. So you got these two guys, these two camps that are pointing fingers at each other. You're the Edomites. No, you're the Edomites. Yeah.
I've even heard a lot of what do they call it, the Black Jew movement or something. I mean, I might be saying that wrong. I don't mean it to be offensive, but they basically say that the Edomites is the white people. Oh, yeah. The red is the rosy cheeks, and the hair is these good beards all the white men have. And I mean, it's just wild, all the different camps you have.
Yeah, it is sad, but again, this is the work of the enemy, the principalities and powers behind the scenes that are trying to keep us divided and fighting one another. We know that there are things that the rabbinic teachings have changed since the 2nd century, and I touched on a little bit of that in fact, we did in our one of our previous books, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, when we went into the change in the teachings regarding Genesis chapter 6, which was the sons of God seeing that the daughters of man were fair. In other words, angels, for lack of a better term, seeing that women were fair, coming down and commingling with them, creating this giant race, the hybrid, semi-divine demigods. That was standard teaching amongst Christian theologians until the time of Augustine in the early 5th century. But amongst Jewish scholars, the rabbis, this changed in the middle of the 2nd century, because after the Bar Kokhba revolt, when this is in the 130s AD, 135 to 138, Simon Bar Kokhba, who was declared to be the Messiah by Rabbi Akiva, who is still one of the most respected and revered rabbis in Jewish history, said that Simon was the Messiah. Christians looked at Simon and said, well, you're not in the clouds, so we're not fighting for you against the Romans. And Simon reportedly began arresting and disfiguring Christians who refused to fight for him. So that began a split between Christians and Jews that has continued to this day. But one of Rabbi Akiva's disciples, a guy named Shimon Bar Yochai, who's credited with writing the Zohar, he didn't. The Zohar came about 1,000 years later, but he's still a very revered figure among the ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel. In fact, once a year on his birthday, they will travel to a mountain where he's buried and worship at his tomb, essentially, in the north of Israel. Shimon Bar Yochai changed the standard accepted rabbinic interpretation of Genesis 6 because Christians were looking at that. I mean, they were essentially de-supernaturalizing the Torah and the Tanakh so that they could, because Christians were saying, yes, we know, for example, who the angel of Yahweh was, the angel of the Lord. You know, that's the pre-incarnate Christ. So they began to de-emphasize this. The teaching that Genesis 6 had a supernatural interpretation was forbidden. The interpretation of the angel of Yahweh as a separate second power in heaven was de-emphasized. So, you know, this split between Christian and Jew has sadly persisted for the last 1900 years. But this wedge is being driven even further open over the last 2 years, ever since Israel began to defend itself. It's Israel has been put in a position where to win the world's approval, Israel basically has to stop defending itself against people who literally want to exterminate them. And
the bulls of Bashan surround me.
Yeah.
You know, and I was talking with Joseph Riverwind. We've actually become pretty good friends. He's basically my neighbor. He lives, 20, 30 minutes down the road from me. He invited me to his house and had a bunch of people from the different reservations come down, and they were camping out and telling old stories and stuff. So I was blessed to be a part of that. But they went over to Israel for, I think, almost 3 months. I was over there doing work and stuff like that. And he was just talking about it too. They got to meet with the soldiers and the people and everything over there. And he was like, you see all this propaganda. He said that, they're not getting, they're cutting off food and water supplies and all this stuff. He said, we've seen all the trucks coming in and out. He said, just a lot of time these Hezbollah and all these other people will just bully and beat the people and take all the supplies and trying to, starve them out. And he said that, what other nation do you know that before they do an attack, he said they announce it on television, broadcast it on the radio, and even fly over and drop leaflets warning the people when they're going to do it, just to try to avoid, innocent casualties, because they'd be so demonized, in the news and stuff. And he said they still get demonized. He said, what country does that? Nobody.
No, and it speaks to the supernatural nature of this conflict. We've got friends over there who are Orthodox Jews. We've heard from Christians, and a lot of it is on social media. In fact, a couple of fellows who I considered friends, one had been a guest on my podcast a couple of times, who was telling me, well, that, for example, the city of Hebron, or Hebron, as they said in Hebrew, is an open-air prison. It's like, we were there in 2023. And in fact, we've been there a couple of times. We went to the Cave of the Patriarchs, but we also walked through the city to the ancient archaeological site. We saw the walls of Hebron that Abraham saw in 1700, 1800 BC. We walked through the city. It is not an open-air prison. The area that's walled off is actually around the Jewish section to protect them from their Arab neighbors. He said, well, you just didn't go to the right places. And they're like, okay, all right. Well, what can you do? But there is a spirit behind this. And the case I'm going to make in the book, War of the Watchers, is that this entity is the one who led the rebellion in Genesis chapter 6. Shemiyaza in the book of 1 Enoch, in my last solo book, The Second Coming of Saturn, identified him as El, who is the father god of the Canaanites. He was Enlil of the Babylonians, Elil to the Akkadians. He was Dagon to the Philistines and Amorites. He was Milcom, called the abomination of the Ammonites. And because he was Milcom, that means he was also Molech. Saturn to the Romans, Kronos to the Greeks, a couple of other names out there throughout history. But I think this is the entity that is directing this, because he thinks he should be the one ruling this planet. If you've read my book, The Second Coming of Saturn, I argue that he is the one called Lucifer in Isaiah chapter 14. He is the rebel who is thrown out of Eden in Ezekiel 28, not Satan. Satan is still roaming the earth. Shemiyaza and his colleagues according to Peter and Jude, are in chains in the abyss, which suggests that God considers them more dangerous than Satan himself. But that, and according to Revelation 9, Abaddon, Apollyon, this same entity, gets out at the end for 5 months, but somehow he thinks he is going to establish his throne above the stars of God, just like in Isaiah chapter 14. And that's who I think is directing this. When you look at the places that were sacred to this entity in the ancient world, of course, the summit of Mount Hermon, girls, we're getting dog wrestling here in the background. But you also had the golden calves set up by Jeroboam after Solomon's son Rehoboam came to power. Jeroboam led a rebellion. Rehoboam didn't handle it well, and Jeroboam set up golden calves at Dan, which is at the foot of Mount Hermon, and at Bethel, which literally means temple or house of El. Now, El's main epithet or nickname among the Canaanites was Bull El. I don't think they were calves. I think they were bulls, but the prophets who referred to them as calves were insulting.
At him.
Yeah, they were insulting him. In fact,
didn't his name mean Great Mountain too, Derek, or am I getting him mixed up with someone else?
Well, that would be Enlil. That would be his. Enlil and Dagon were both referred to as Great Mountain.
Hey guys, it's no secret that every single day your dollar loses its value. If a man invested $1,000 in silver in the 60s, today that same $1,000 would have magically turned into almost $30,000. Silver and gold only continues to increase in value. If you have a 401k or money sitting in savings, that is just a number in a computer system that is one EMP or hack away from being deleted forever. I've recently teamed up with Cornerstone Assets and Metals and started investing in gold and silver myself. And I highly encourage the listeners, if you have money in savings just sitting there, invest it in hard, tangible assets. The same thing with your 401ks. Take a 20 to 30% cut of that 401k, that number in a computer system, and invest into hard, tangible assets that is proven to only increase in value. Be sure to check out the link in the description or the number on the screen, and be sure to tell them that Doc Brown from Prometheus Lens sent you. Torch is high, guys.
So it's the same entity. And again, you can see through these, these nicknames, Great Mountain, Bull El, this entity did not have a self-image problem. But in Hosea chapter 8, where Hosea is condemning these golden calves, he is beginning in verse 5, you read, I have spurned your calf, O Samaria. My anger burns against them. And of course, the golden calves drew the northern kingdoms away from the temple in Jerusalem and led them into this pagan worship in the northern locations of Dan and at Bethel. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? Now, here's the money quote. For it is from Israel. A craftsman made it. It is not God. The calf of Samaria shall be broken to pieces. Now, that verse, for it is from Israel, that's not what it says in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it actually says for from Israel. And the English translators inserted those other words to try to make sense of the sentence. For from Israel. Now, about 70 years ago, a scholar by the name of Naphtali Tur Sinai, and again, this is a guy who's got some chops. He was the first president of the Academy of Hebrew Language in Jerusalem when they had to try to bring back Hebrew from the brink of extinction as a living language. So this is a guy who knows the language. Again, not some podcaster trying to come up with a fancy way, an exciting new way of interpreting the Bible. He pointed out that because Hebrew is a consonantal language, no vowels, when you regroup the consonants, that verse reads this, for it is Bull El. A craftsman made it. It is not God.
That makes more sense.
So, yeah, it's an interesting change, but it does make sense, and it would especially make sense given that the two cult sites set up by Jeroboam were at Beth El and at the foot of Mount Hermon, which is everybody knew at the summit of Mount Hermon was the tabernacle, the threshing floor of El. In other words, it's where El and Asherah of the Asherah poles would hold court with their 70 sons, representing the gods of all the nations. So you've got those locations. You've got, again, this entity being Molech, you've got the Tophet at Jerusalem, where children were offered in the fire to Molech. Since Dagon was another identity worn by this entity, you had the Gaza Strip, where Dagon was the chief deity. Not just during the Philistine period, but as late as the 6th century AD. It's known that Dagon was the patron deity of Gaza. So this entity was all over. Oh, of course, you got Carmel, Mount Carmel, which means vineyard of El. So you've got places all over the land of Israel that were sacred to this entity. El, Dagon, Molech, et cetera, et cetera. And I think he wants them back. Now, as I mentioned earlier, he, being Shemiyaza, the leader of the Genesis 6 rebellion, is locked up in chains in the abyss, according to Peter. In fact, Peter's specific. He says in 2 Peter 2, verse 4, God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but thrust them down to Tartarus in the Greek. It's Tartarosis. That's the bottomless pit. That's where the supernatural threats to the divine order were kept. That's where the titans of the Greeks and Romans were locked up by Zeus and the Olympians, which is, of course, the fake news version of what actually happened. It was the sons of God from Genesis 6. They are the titans of the Greeks and Romans. Anyway, how can he, if this guy's locked up in the abyss, how can he influence? Sorry, it's very entertaining. How can he influence activity on the surface if he's locked up in the abyss? I would argue it's the same way that a mafia boss or a gang leader can influence things happening outside the prison. He's got minions. He's got demonic minions that can move messages back and forth. I mean, you just look at the number one cause of death on planet Earth for like the last 4 or 5 years running, according to what is it, World Meter? Anyway, there's a place that you can go online and get all sorts of data and statistics regarding life on planet Earth. But the number one cause of death on Earth, and it's not even close, like 45 million dead last year, is abortion. And that's exactly how Molech was worshipped in the ancient world. It's how Kronos was worshipped in the ancient world. Baal Haman, the Phoenician identity of this entity. That's how he was worshipped in the ancient world, the sacrifice of children. And that is all communicable diseases on Earth, Doc. Last year, 12.9 million dead, 45 million abortions. It's not even close. That's who I think is behind all of this. And that's the case I'm going to make in the book War of the Watchers.
Man. And this is kind of a side tangent, but it's related to something you said earlier because I want to pick your brain on it. I'd always been told and read it like Ezekiel 28 was about, the Hasatan, the Nakash.
Sure.
And so when you get there and it starts talking about the coverings, every precious stone was your covering, beryl, onyx, topaz, it names all the colors and stuff. I think it's in the Masoretic text lists 9, but the Septuagint lists 12.
Correct.
And this is basically like a photo Polaroid picture copy of the priestly ephod. So it's painting this entity in a priestly role, wearing the garments. And then it even says, to remove doubt, it says, how's this worded? You defiled your sanctuaries. So it even said that he's wearing this garment. He defiled his sanctuary. So he had a sanctuary. So is this entity, Shemyaza, do you think maybe like he was the high priest in the temple of God in heaven?
Well, that's one of the questions. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the questions I asked in the Second Coming of Saturn. I mean, it's not a theological hill I would die on, but it is a really interesting question. If we assume that this entity is not the Nakash, the serpent from Eden, then it opens up the possibility that we're dealing with another entity. And I started down this road. In fact, credit to David W. Lowe, author of a book called Deconstructing Lucifer. It's about 15 years ago. And when David put out that book and I got a copy of it, it's like, oh, come on, David. Everybody knows Lucifer is Satan. And then when I started researching the second coming of Saturn, it's like, oh, wait a minute now. How can Satan be a Nakash, a serpent? And in fact, we see in the Old Testament in Numbers 21 and a couple places in Isaiah where the word Nakash, serpent, and seraph, the singular form of seraphim, like from Isaiah chapter 6, 6 wings, they appear to be serpentine, and that's a scholarly consensus that there was a serpentine appearance to the seraphim. So perhaps the Nakash was one of the seraphim. But how could he be one of those and the guardian cherub at the same time? Because in Ezekiel 1 and 10, you see chapters 1 and 10 that the cherubim are described pretty clearly, and they don't look anything serpentine. It's the, 4 faces, human, ox, lion, eagle, or human, cherub, lion, eagle, which suggests that the cherubim were bovid, bull-like in appearance. That doesn't sound serpentine at all. How do you get around that? Well, some people say, well, maybe they can change forms. Okay, but the Bible doesn't tell us that. But what the Septuagint translation does tell us, and the Septuagint is the version translated from Hebrew into Greek around 200 BC. So it gives us a window into what Jewish religious scholars were thinking before the Christian era and before they started desupernaturalizing it. The Masoretic text is what our Bibles are based on. And this is why we recommend to people the books by Doug Woodward, Rebooting the Bible, volumes 1 and 2, which looks at the differences between the Septuagint and our English Bibles. There's no doctrinal changes that are made, but some of these things are really interesting, like what you pointed out here in Ezekiel 28.
Doug Van Dorn, he told me a while back that, to point away from Jesus, they added several hundred years to the life of Seth to make it look like he was Melchizedek, to make him alive during that time. So when everybody was saying that Melchizedek was a Christophany of Jesus Christ, they went in there and changed it and made Seth alive during his time. They're like, no, that's Seth. That's Seth.
Right. Well, Doug Woodward, we got too many Dougs. We got a bunch of Doug friends. Doug Woodward pointed out that years were added to a number of the patriarchs in order to, in the Masoretic text, in order to push the timing of the arrival of Messiah past the 1st century AD, which is exactly when Jesus arrived. So no, that wasn't him. That wasn't him. He's still 2,000 years in the future or whatever.
That was Shem, guys. That was a mistake on my part. I said Seth.
Shem, that's right. So anyway, when you're looking back at Ezekiel 28, you've got this entity who, he's the guardian cherub that covers. No, in the Septuagint translation, it says, I placed you with the cherub in the holy mountain of God. And later in verse 16 is, and the cherub led you out of the middle of the fiery stones. In other words, the cherub threw you out of Eden. So you got 2 possibilities here. Number one is that, so the Nakash is not the cherub, so maybe it is the Nakash. I go with the possibility that what we're dealing with here is the other rebel from Eden, which is Shemiyaza, who thought that he was all that, because when you get into the Isaiah 14 chapter, especially when he's thrown down to Sheol and the Rephaim rise up to greet him and say, hey, look, you're just as weak as we are. Satan in the Old Testament is never, ever connected with the underworld or with the Nephilim or the Rephaim. He's still got access to the throne room of God. Hey, this guy Job over here, let me tempt him and test him and see how faithful he really is. Zechariah, where he accuses the high priest in the time of Zechariah. So the Jews, especially at the time of the apostles, would not have seen Satan as this character connected to Genesis 6, the Nephilim, the Rephaim, or any of that, or the underworld. This idea that Satan is the Lord of hell developed in the first 3 or 4 centuries after the resurrection of Jesus. So that's
Dante's Inferno and all that kind of stuff.
Right. It's more tradition than it is actual scripture. When you start digging into the scripture, and again, apologies to David W. Lowe for not really taking him seriously when his book came out. But he's right. The early church fathers are the ones who kind of read into things like, oh, yeah, okay, this scripture in Luke where Jesus saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning, that must be Isaiah 14. But none of the Old Testament prophets saw it that way. That was the connect. Jesus didn't specifically connect it that way. It was the early church, like I think Tertullian in the 2nd century, 3rd century maybe, who was the one who saw that. So anyway, we've got this entity, I think, Shemiyaza, Enlil, Dagon, Molech, Saturn, Kronos, et cetera, Apollyon, Abaddon, who is connected to the underworld, who is specifically connected to the creation of the Nephilim and the Rephaim, which are their spirits. I think he's the one who's referred to in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. I think he's the one who wants more than anything to take the land of Israel away from God, because he's harboring this just unimaginable rage and resentment for having it taken away from him.
Yeah, and also, too, like the theme of your book for those, this is obvious to some of my listeners, I know, but some people, maybe it's new, but kind of centers around Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, the way I look at it. This was when Tower of Babel, God came down, not only divided the tongues, he divided the nations to peoples amongst the B'nai Ha Elohim, the sons of God. Mm-hmm. But he said, Jacob, Israel is my allotted inheritance. And so if you're looking at it as a family aspect, and he rules, it's a monarch. It's a king, and the king has sons, which are princes, and they're the ones to get the inheritance, and they're kind of like fighting over who's going to be next on the throne, and they're all like this cosmic chess game, and they want the one piece that they were denied, kind of. Are you a hunter, a hiker, or just an outdoor enthusiast? Well, if you are, you know that good quality gear is hard to come by, and finding all-American made is like finding Bigfoot in the woods. Hence the name of Squatch Survival Gear. Head on over to squatchsurvivalgear.com. Use the code PLP10 for 10% off store-wide.
Yeah, it's like the parable that Jesus told of the wicked tenants, where a landowner buys a piece of land and he walls it off and he puts a guard tower up and he plants a vineyard there, and then he hires these tenants to come in and work the ground, and then when the time comes, he'll send somebody to collect the produce of the land. Well, he comes, and these tenants, these renters, decide to beat up the guy who's supposed to take the grapes back to the owner. And so he sends another, they beat him up, and finally he sends his son. And so these tenants say, let's kill him, and then we'll get his inheritance. And then Jesus asked his audience, which included the religious leaders of Israel at the time, so what's going to happen to them when they kill the son, and when the owner of the property finds out? What's going to happen when he comes? Oh, well, it'll be destroyed. And then they perceived Jesus was speaking about them. Well, yeah, I think Jesus was speaking to them, but also to the spirits behind them, because basically in this parable, the earth is the vineyard, and he had these supernatural tenants that he placed to administer it for him. Angels.
Almost like watchers.
Yeah, exactly. And they chose to sin and try to keep it for themselves. And when the son came, they killed the son, thinking we'll get his inheritance. What's amazing to me is that, well, first of all, it's amazing to me that I didn't figure out that interpretation of that particular parable as soon as I realized the divine counsel worldview. Oh, wow, implications. It took a while for that to sink in and to wait a minute. But what amazes me even more is that these principalities and powers, realizing that Jesus was speaking to them, sent him to the cross and killed him anyway. It's like they couldn't help themselves. Almost like the people who are completely governed by their emotions, by their rage. Yeah. rather than by
Like I say,
logic.
blinded by their rage. And
Yeah.
as we were talking pre-roll, this whole Charlie Kirk stuff, these guys, Charlie was a calculated and well-thought man and went and debated these people and witnessed, the kingdom of God to these people. And all these videos, they're just, they lose their minds, and it just doesn't look good on them because they act on their raw emotion.
No, it doesn't. And so as of this afternoon, as we're recording this, and it's on, Friday the 12th, so just 48 hours really after Charlie sadly had his life cut short, there are more than 650 people who went public on social media with their glee, virtually dancing on his grave, and have been relieved of their positions with their places of employment. So it's like, even knowing that there's a chance that they could get fired, they just can't help themselves. So just imagine in the spirit realm how the rage they must have had at this, thinking as they were sent down here to this wonderful planet, that they had an opportunity to do what God asked them to do. Instead, they rebelled, perhaps thinking they'd get away with it. Mm-hmm. And when Milton, and I really need to read Paradise Lost. Sharon keeps telling me I need to read Paradise Lost.
I've tried the language. I can't follow, man. I can't follow.
It's once you get used to the pattern of the poetry, the rhythm, it becomes easier. But it's wonderful because there's a scene that Milton writes where Satan and his minions are commiserating, and they complain that God hid his true power from them. He let us think we could win. That's not really an excuse, but that's how they are. That's how they're portrayed by Milton, and I thought it was very insightful. But I think that's what we're dealing with here in this supernatural war. Again, as Paul wrote to the church at Ephesus, principalities, powers, cosmic rulers over this present darkness. It's very easy for us to get caught up in the headlines. We look at Israel and what's happening. We see the images that the news media chooses to show us from Gaza, and people are moved. I mean, it is just astonishing what has been happening there. And yet, rather than say, Hamas could have stopped this war at any point in the last 710 days by saying, we surrender, we're going to lay down our weapons, we will return to you all of the hostages that we've taken. And they haven't done that. They haven't done that to this day, even though they are completely, there is no hope for them of winning this war on the ground. But they know the longer they stretch it out, the more images and video of people suffering are shared around the world, the more pressure builds on Israel to surrender. And I think for the first time in my 63 years of life, I can now finally imagine a scenario where a dynamic world leader can raise up a coalition to say, we told Israel to stop, they wouldn't stop, and so now we're going to go in there and make them stop. And prior to this, I mean, all of the other scenarios that I've heard, it's like, well, maybe Israel will discover a lot of oil. Is that the hooks in the jaw that will bring Gog of Magog? No, I think it's going to be something like what we're seeing right now. These poor people of Gaza, Israel is waging genocide, committing genocide, and so we're going to go to war and make Israel stop. It is a culture of death, but that's who these entities are. I mean, when you look at the history, especially again in the second coming of Saturn, I tracked this. One of Dagon's main epithets, other than Great Mountain, was Lord of the Corpse. Kronos, who is his equivalent in the Greek pantheon, his main one of his epithets was Kronos Technophagos, which means Kronos child eater. So this is who they're serving, in my view. And so we shouldn't be surprised to see it. But it's just we in the West have been first of all, so desupernaturalized, we can't conceive of anybody so committed to their religion that they would follow it to this extreme. Secondly, even though we've got 1,400 years of Islamic history on which to draw, we are so ignorant of history that we can't look at the examples that history has laid out for us and say, yeah, this really is what Hamas and other violent Islamic movements. I'm not going to say radical because, frankly, violent Islam is mainstream. But to violent Islamic movements, this is really what they're all about.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when their book tells you, convert or die, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Muhammad. I mean, he had no success. I wrote about this in my book, Bad Moon Rising. He had no success, and drawing on scholars who've done more primary research than I've been able to do, scholars who can actually read the original Arabic language sources. They have a long history going back to Muhammad of basing their religion about killing you and taking your stuff. Muhammad had no success with his religion until he made caravan raiding a holy act. Suddenly, Allah has decreed that we can go and steal their stuff and take their women. And, if they'll join us, we don't have to cut off their heads. Well, hey, that's a pretty good marketing recruitment incentive for the young men on the losing side of the battle.
Good turnover rate.
Yeah. And so in the span of 10 years, Muhammad went from 100 followers to controlling all of Arabia.
And just touching on that too, that was another good book you wrote. And I remember in our reading, of course, as we get older and we study more, sometimes our ideas change or our opinions change. And that's kind of an older book of yours. But I remember in there, you were talking about basically the Nation of Islam and the Islamic faith and how you believe that this was going to be a tool, that the Satan uses in the end times, and this is going to be one of the main proponents of the army toward Armageddon and warring against Jerusalem. Do you still hold that view?
I do, and I think that any end time scenario that doesn't account for the fact that there are 1.7 billion Muslims on Earth right now, I think that's about right. It may be more than that, in fact, but the last time I checked, according to research from, I think, the Pew Research Center, which studies religious trends, the Islamic world will outnumber Christendom by about 2075. Right now, there are about 2.2 million or billion Christians on Earth, and I think about 1.7 or 1.8 billion Muslims. But because we Christians are, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, we're not having enough babies to even replace the population, and a lot of our kids are falling away from the faith. Whereas Muslims tend to have more than, the 2.1 children you need to just maintain population. They're growing. So there will be more Muslims.
Lesbians, there's no homosexuals.
Not officially,
and women that are entrepreneurs wanting to be the CEO, make all this money. So, yeah, we've painted ourselves in a bottleneck where we are going to be drowned out by their populace.
Yeah, but I don't think, and I didn't write this with any great joy or satisfaction. I think Islam will be used as cannon fodder in this last war. I think they will be used to set up the Jews to accept a dynamic geopolitical leader who will save Israel at its hour of greatest calamity, greatest need, sort of like King Arthur, returning from, Avalon when, the hour of Britain's greatest need. And this victory will be total, and it will be miraculous, or appear to be miraculous, and it will be the wrong man. And Jews will welcome this false Messiah or anti-Christ as their savior. But as we see in Zechariah 12, Zechariah 14, they are still in the land when the true Messiah arrives. There will be a remnant who will recognize what's happened and be here when the Messiah returns. The one thing I would change in Bad Moon Rising is that I'd argued at the time, this was published in 2018, that Allah was a construct. He was sort of a simulacrum, like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the God behind the curtain. That the gods of Mesopotamia, the gods who had been the gods of Babylon and Akkad and the Canaanites and the Hurrians and the Hittites and so forth, the Greeks and the Romans, that they had been taken off guard, by surprise, by the resurrection. And we see this in 1 Corinthians 2, if I'm remembering correctly. It's where Paul writes, the archons, the rulers of the age, had understood what was being revealed through the apostles and the prophets. They would not have crucified the Lord of glory. They sent him to the cross anyway, sort of like the wicked tenants. They didn't realize what was going on, and they unwittingly helped Jesus fulfill his mission. So I think now I would go back and edit and put out a new edition of Bad Moon Rising and argue that Allah is in fact this entity, Shemiyaza, Enlil, El. Etymologically, it even connects, because the name Enlil, which is the Akkadian form of Enlil, derives from the Semitic words Il and Ilu, meaning God of gods, or God of all the gods. And similarly in Arabic, the name Allah derives from Il Ilah, meaning the God. So it's circumstantial evidence, but when you look at the fruit of the followers of this entity, again, a culture of death, and one that is fixated on destroying Jews and Christians predominantly. I mean, of course, they've also gone to war with Hindus and Buddhists and Zoroastrians throughout the centuries, but and of course, the pagans of the ancient world as well. But it's Jews and Christians seem to be their main focus. I think the evidence fits together. And sadly, I think Muslims will just be used as cannon fodder in this final war. Now, how are you going to get a nation of 14 million Jews, and only 7 million of them live in Israel, fighting off an army of a couple 100 million Muslims that live in the immediate neighborhood of Israel? I don't know, but
something miraculous. And again, from the enemy standpoint, the principalities and powers, the Muslims are already in their camp. They don't need to get them, but that what they do want to do is, again, prove God to be a liar, destroy the people that he declared to be his, and perhaps set up their mount of assembly where God had decreed that he would live forever. Mm-hmm. Yep. Was it that passage is Isaiah 14? How long will you look with envy on my mountain? And
that's Psalm 68, actually.
Okay, yeah. Well, Derek, I ain't going to keep you, brother. I know we've only been recording for an hour, but we talked behind the scenes for probably a good 30, 45 minutes catching up. But man, I appreciate your time and appreciate your brain and stretching us. And every time you come on, man, I tell people you're like a walking dictionary. And I'm honored to not only be able to read your stuff and share thoughts with you, man, but to consider you a brother in Christ and a friend.
Amen.
Just thank you for your time, man. Anybody that tuned in halfway through, or if they were washing dishes, screaming at their kid in the middle of the episode or something, missed the beginning of it, go ahead and plug your stuff one more time for those that missed it, maybe. You
can find basically everything that we do is at gilberthouse.org. gilberthouse.org. We got a free app, which is for mobile devices, also for smart TVs or like Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV. All of our content will be there, including occasionally appearances by Grace and Glory, the rescue dogs. But that's the easiest way to keep up with what we do. We do a weekly Bible study, which is how this whole thing started really back in 2014, as we started reading through the Bible out loud. Things sort of jump out at you, and it's like, wait a minute, was that always in there? Like the Exodus 14 thing. God told Moses to turn around and go to a place called Baal Zephon. That's what my first book was inspired by, was just that Bible study. So if you're looking for a weekly verse by verse, I don't know if we call it exegesis, but at least we try, you can find that at gilberthouse.org as well.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you. Guys, be sure to check your stuff out. Like I said earlier, and as you can tell by this conversation, he's a walking dictionary. He knows his stuff. And him and his wife, man, they're the ultimate tag team working in this sphere, and they're doing Bible studies. They're doing trips to Israel. They're doing documentaries, working with Skywatch. These guys are just amazing people, and they're amazingly friendly people. So check out their stuff and contribute to their work. And if you haven't noticed, or maybe you just weren't paying attention, but this is the voice of our intro, guys. This is the original Torches High.
That's it. Another OG thing, yeah.
Yeah. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that, man. And until next time, send us off, Derek.
Torches high.
That's right.